Welcome to my non-spoiler review of Alphacore #1 by Chuck Dixon and Joe Bennett with the art. So I feel like I have to bring this up every single Rippaverse review because I like doing these Rippaverse reviews because I just like what they're doing and I think it's cool. I was never into comics before the Rippaverse stuff started up. I don't really have any other comics. I've mentioned it before. This is my first kind of experience getting into some comics and reading some comics. And I think reading these things is going to get me into possibly in the future digging up some older comics and, before things got really weird and bad. But yes, I am very much a comic book normie. I don't know a whole lot about comic books, but I will say I am quite enjoying the beginnings here of the Rippaverse from Eric July. And I am starting to really like that he's getting a bunch of different people now on board with his whole company and this universe he's trying to build here with the Rippaverse. It's centered around the city of Florespark, Texas. So that's where we're very heavily centered in Alphacore #1 by Chuck Dixon. Now I know from what I've heard plenty of things in streams and videos that Chuck Dixon is a very well-known and a lot of people say legendary comic book writer. He's been doing lots of things for years. I don't know his work. I don't have experience reading his work at all, but I do trust that he's pretty damn good, especially after reading this. I liked it. And, if they chose him to come on and kick off the Alphacore series in the Rippaverse, I think there's a lot of trust in this guy. And I do like the book. I do really like the book itself. And I still don't know if I like this or Isom #2 more, because I did like Isom #2 a little more than the first one. But there are some connections with some characters in Alphacore that connect to what we kind of saw in Isom #1. There are some characters that are finally getting reintroduced and re-brought into the story. They're not just little cameos kept for later. Now they're actually coming into the grander story. So, as I said, this is going to be spoiler free, but I mean, if you look at the covers for Alphacore, you can see some of these characters that are heavily focused in this book. You got Lillian, I don't remember last name yet. You got Michael Copper as well. Two very heavily focused characters in this book that were, I believe, introduced in Isom #1. We saw them for a quick moment, I believe, at Darren's place, his bar or whatever. I think they were there. And we saw them for a quick moment. There's also some information of them on the cards that were released with Isom #1, but we didn't really know much more about them. But now we're starting to reintroduce these characters and coming back. But with them, we are also seeing the Alphacore again, too. So we're getting a whole lot more of them. Now, we have seen them in both Isom #1 and 2. Both of them in Isom 1 and 2 heavily focused on them with Yaira. But I will say this now, we do not see Yaira at all in Alphacore #1. It's focused on Alphacore, but it's more, I don't know the exact time placement of the book compared to when Isom happens, maybe before, kind of the same general time. I don't know. I'm just assuming it's kind of the same time, and Yaira is just another project and person they're focusing on. But Yaira is not mentioned or really brought up in the book, but Yaira is the next big project from the Rippaverse. So with the actual Alphacore group, we do learn a bit more of Brian Solari, and we do learn more of Ingrid Valdez as well. The one character we don't really learn that much about still, and it was still quite mysterious in this book, is Braxwell. We don't know much about him, but we get to see him do some cool stuff in this book. Brian Solari, as it's written on the back, they mentioned he's he used to be in the military and now he wants to be a cop for Florespark, but obviously he is an accept who is working for the police in Florespark, and he's basically helping the police there operate and deal with accepts that are basically dangerous and criminals and stuff like that. And we do get to see some really cool accepts in this book, and we get a better understanding of how the accepts are. There's different groups and types of accepts. They have different powers. Lots of them seem very energy based. Lots of them have things glowing like their fingers or their eyes and stuff like that. But in this one, you could see them on the cover. You got this electric guy who is heavily focused on in the book. Probably the most heavily focused accept in the book is this electric guy on the cover. And then you also got this other guy right here, is like a fire lava guy. He shows up for a moment too. Very cool and interesting characters, and so it shows that it's not just normal people, and then they just have like a little energy. They can really look really weird and freaky at times too, and I think that's kind of cool. So from what I'm getting is, in this world, in this Rippaverse world, there isn't just a few, every now and then, some heroes out there with special abilities that are there to save the day. It's more, there is quite a few different types of accepts out there, and it's pretty widely known that these accepts are out there, and that there are several different people that can have powers. And in this book, we also do learn that some people maybe keep it hidden, and they don't really want to be known for having certain powers, because some people just want to more be seen as normal rather than like being maybe a weird person and have superpowers and stuff. So it's interesting, that type of concept. And in this book, I gotta say, the most interesting character of the Alphacore, of the main three, I think was Ingrid, actually. Brian definitely got a heavy focus as well, and I did like his story as well, but I think Ingrid's story with a different character as well in the book, which, you know, was pretty heavily focused right there at the end as well, something big that happened with another character. I think her story overall with that one character, and again, her interactions with the group and why she's actually there and who she really wants to be. And we kind of learn a little bit about that, who she actually kind of wants to be seen as. She doesn't want to be seen as, how can I put it without spoiling, not really as weird. I don't know if I can really say much more than that, but we do get to learn more of like how she really wants to see people to see her and how she sees herself. And I don't think the Alphacore sees themselves as the bad guys. They just don't. But obviously they're the police force. And I think, just my personal guess, maybe with Yaira, we're going to see that different side of the Alphacore maybe being more antagonistic towards like a character that we're following, like Yaira or Isom. So I think that's interesting. Again, the whole police force thing does bring that interesting dynamic, because it's not just like a superhero running around doing things outside of the law almost. It's more, they're literally working with the police force in Florspark to specifically take down accepts. If there's not accept involved, they're typically not going to be involved in that issue. So I did mention earlier that Lillian and Michael Copper from Isom #1, they are making a return, and they are pretty heavily focused. They are not like little cameos that are thrown in again just to kind of lead to something bigger. They are actually pretty heavily focused in Alphacore #1, and I think we're going to be seeing them quite a bit more, maybe going here into maybe Alphacore #2 or something else. I don't really know how this whole woven universe is going to all show up and what different characters are going to show up, but we do get a pretty heavy focus on them. I will not really tell you what their focus is, just to keep it spoiler free, but I do think they are probably the most interesting aspect of the whole story, is how they were woven and interconnected with basically everything in some way. We did get to see some butting heads within our actual like police force themselves. There's always different people at odds. There's even odds with Brian, for example, and the police force, and you know, within Alphacore itself, there's just different, you know, odds and differences. They do have like this big police station that kind of like flies above the city. I believe we've seen that before in previous books now with Isom. So they do kind of operate in their own little bubble up in the sky, almost specifically for Alphacore. And they are specifically designed to deal with accepts. And that is kind of a conflict that does come up pretty early on in the book. Now, one thing I will say about, I'll just show one page here real quick. The art in this book, I think I like it, I don't know a lot more, but I think I do like it a little more than the Isom art, and it's just a personal choice, obviously, because the art in Isom is still great as well. But there's something about the art, Joe Bennett, and the colors in the book as well. I think it looks really good. I think it really does. And I don't know, I felt myself a little bit more gripped into the story, the action, the way that things were portrayed and stuff. I think it looked really good. Now, again, obviously I mentioned earlier, I am a very big comic book normie, so I'm not familiar with a lot of like comic book artists and stuff. So this is kind of my first experience really starting to see a different type of art style compared to another comic now I had now read. So it's starting to all just kind of like be all new to me, I suppose. But I did like the story, and I think the art was probably my favorite of the Rippaverse books so far, and I'm looking forward to seeing more in like from Joe Bennett. You get into the book, and then after that you get the little tease for Yaira, which it does show the cover of Yaira that we have already seen. So Yaira is definitely the next big project for the Rippaverse. But generally, man, I did like the book. I really did. Again, I can't really tell you if I like it more than Isom 2, or I think I kind of like them both equally, I suppose. We're still early on in the Rippaverse, but I do know that they're going to be kicking out books a lot quicker next year for sure. So we're going to get a much grander sense of what this universe that the Rippaverse is building. We're in a much better sense of how it is and what it feels like with so many more books now coming out, and I think I'm looking forward to that. But this is definitely the more city-centric book for sure. You're mostly focused in the city itself. Isom, I felt like, was a little bit of a slower story, mostly focused on just Isom himself and his feelings and his thoughts and what he's specifically doing. And this book is more heavily focused on not just Alphacore, but like Lillian and Michael, and then it's also focused on like the police force themselves that they surround themselves with. So it's a much grander book. There's a lot more, I think, happening in the book, and it's actually quite exciting mostly through the book. Not that Isom is like boring in any sense, but there's just like a lot of action and stuff happening kind of like all the time in this book. You do stop for a few moments every now and then in this book to get some dialogue in there. I think that's good. But Isom's just a different type of story being told. And I do think I like the more mystical, like fantasy type of stuff they try to do there at the end of Isom number 2 there with Bloodruth and stuff. I really like them mentioning all the interdimensional type stuff. I think that stuff was really cool. And even in Isom number 1, the whole thing at the end was some threat coming, and that whole group at the end, like, that was still my most like fascinated part. That was my most interesting part to me for the Rippaverse so far, and I'm still looking forward to seeing what that's going to be. But this is definitely a certain style of story. If you rather focus on the type of stuff they're doing in Isom, maybe you won't like it. I think it's fine though. Generally, overall, I think it's all just really interesting so far. It's still all new, and we're still kind of learning and finding our feeling into the actual Rippaverse universe here. And I think as these books start to come out, we're going to start to find our favorites and find our types of stories that we more want to read about, because obviously not everyone's going to pick up every book and read every book. They're going to find their favorites, read more of that. I personally think Yaira is going to be a very big release going in the next year. I think a lot of people are looking forward to that. That's been very highly anticipated. So it's just a very different type of thing. I think we're going to see lots of different perspectives of storytelling with the people that Eric July is bringing in, and I think it's going to be kind of cool. That is my spoiler-free review of Alphacore number 1. I think it's good. I definitely recommend picking it up. Now, when it comes to the negatives, I think a lot of people, when they review this, a lot of people are going to be reading this book who are very familiar with comic books. Maybe they've been reading comic books their whole life and they already know and can compare it to so many other comics that they know and love. And that's very reasonable. It makes a lot of sense. Perfectly, it makes sense to me. But I have nothing to compare it to in terms of comic books. Like, I have not read any really comic books outside of Rippaverse as of yet, at least, so I can't compare it to anything else. So I suppose if there's any negatives or things that are done a little weird or abnormal compared to what, say, you see in different types of comics elsewhere, I can't really compare that. But with this duo right here of Chuck Dixon, Joe Bennett, all the art, I think if we continue with this, I believe we are going to be continuing that with Alphacore. I think it'll be very, very fun. I think I was the most engaged with this book out of the 3 so far. I was the most into it, most interested, and most engaged, and I think I got through this one the quickest out of all the 3, just because it was a lot of fun in this one. Not that the other ones were super interesting, but this one was, I would say, a lot of fun to read out of all 3 so far. And I think we're only going to see a lot more craziness going into Yaira. So that's it. That's all I really got to say about Alphacore number 1, and let's see what Yaira's got to bring us.